Welcome to another episode of AMA with LCJ. I am so excited to have you here today. It's going to be a good one, I promise you. We're going to be talking about tricks or treats, motivation hacks to keep you going. It is by far, I say every topic's my favorite topic, but that's just because honestly, I love talking about all things culture, leadership, you name it. I love talking about it. But motivating hacks is something I think a lot of leaders in general struggle with. So we're going to talk about it. Tricks or treats, motivation hacks to keep you going. I've already got some questions queued up. So we're going to hop right in and get it popping. Let's go. All right, so here's the deal. We're just going to talk right out of the gate about a couple of things, couple of housekeeping things. Number one, if you have a question, drop the question in the comments section. I will actually be able to see it and pull it up so that everybody else can see the question. I always hope that AMA with LCJ, for those who don't know what AMA is Ask Me Anything. I really want to make sure that this is interactive, that you're getting questions answered, ideas, share your amens, your I don't agree with it, the whole nine, because this is how we're going to get better together, right? Like that's the way we're going to do it. So today is going to be fun. I promise you. So let's first really just hop in. Sorry, y'all, I'm pulling up my notes here. Wrong screen. Gotta love that. All right, so we're going to be hopping into, let's just start with the basis of what is motivation. So, one of the things I want to talk about is the very first question that I'm going to say is we're going to talk about, can you explain the concept of intrinsic motivation and why it's important in a leadership context? So, before we even get started, we really have to understand what intrinsic motivation is. I think one of the hardest things that leaders struggle with, if you're, and this is whether you're in a volunteer leadership capacity, doesn't matter how big or how small your team is, motivation is one of the harder things to really hack, right? And getting people to understand. So, explaining this concept of intrinsic motivation, because a lot of times people think motivation is motivation, and it's not. There's intrinsic motivation and there's extrinsic motivation. Sorry, I literally just had like a major brain fog. Okay, so when we talk about intrinsic motivation and why it's important, so here's the thing. Intrinsic motivation really is about like the internal desire to do something just because it's what I want to do, right? So you're doing it not necessarily for an external reward. So that's intrinsic motivation. I'm doing what it is that I want, that I need to be doing something simply because I'm doing it and I'm not doing it for an external reward, right? So, in a leadership context, why this is so important is because it really does drive long term engagement and performance, right? I think sometimes in motivating teams, we always talk about carrot stick. But if you realize it, carrot and stick are both external factors in trying to motivate people. And so, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is, how do you motivate people to do what it is that you need them to do? And it come from here, right? We talk about head, heart, hands, right? And so, when you think about this motivation, intrinsic motivation, and why it's important in leadership, you have head, heart, and hands, right? I know what I need to do. I've got to do it. It's up here. That's head, right? Got it. Heart, that's really where I think intrinsic motivation comes from, which is, hey, I'm going to do what I need to do because I'm taking pride in my work. I love the work that I do. Those are all internal. I believe I'm making an impact. All of these things roll into the intrinsic motivation. And then you go to hands, which is, I've connected my head and my heart, and now I'm actually going to go do the work. So those are things that I think about when we think about motivation and intrinsic motivation, why it's so important in terms of that. Sorry, y'all. got a short in my headphones. So now let's talk really quickly about extrinsic motivation. Okay. Yep. Okay. I just want to make sure I had the right question up. All right. So, how does intrinsic motivation differ from extrinsic motivation? And why should leaders care? Okay. So, we've already talked about intrinsic, why it's important. So, extrinsic motivation is fueled by external rewards like bonuses, money, promotions. And then we talked about how this intrinsic motivation comes from within. Now, why this is important for us as leaders, because I want us to establish a really good baseline as we're talking about this. And we really get into some more hacks and tricks about this because we've got to have an understanding of what motivation actually is. So, when we think about it, extrinsic motivation is temporary. This is why we have to really understand this as leaders because you're not always going to be able to give people promotions. You're not going to always be able to give them raises and bonuses. And so if it is all extrinsically motivated, it becomes harder, right? It's not sustainable. And so I like to think of it as when we think about leadership and motivation, how do you get these shifts internally? These internal, I'm going to probably start using internal and external because it just makes it so much easier to get through the rest of this live, right? How do I get this internal motivation where I'm making these shifts to get, to really make sure that I'm getting a high performing team, that we're meeting our goals and our expectations, all of those things. What does that look like? Now, sometimes, look, I'm going to keep it. Y'all know how I do. I keep it completely and utterly honest with you. Here's the deal. Sometimes some people need a little external motivation. It happens, right? Like you're working towards a bonus, you're working towards a promotion or a raise or prizes. All of that is good because I do think that you can get boosts in morale, temporary boost in productivity sometimes when you need it. Like those things are important, but leaders cannot rely on external motivation long term because it's not sustainable. So how do you figure out really what to do day to day, week to week, month over month to really hone in on like what I would say is how to get this, how are you getting like this tick? What makes people tick? What does that look like? How do I figure those things out? So those are, I would say, initially how we're going to be talking about motivation, internal motivation, external motivation, and what does that look like. So hop in. If it's good to you, if you have some ideas, do not be afraid, y'all. I know some of y'all are watching because I can see you. I got a tool, so I know y'all are here. So say what's up. Let me know if this is resonating, and then going from there. All right, so let's hop into what are some things. Hold on, sorry. So I'm going to just hop out, right? We're just going to hop into the gate. Don't forget, if you have questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. I will see them and I want to be able to engage with you. So are there any psychological tricks or nudges that leaders can use to really enhance internal motivation, right? So what are some things that leaders can do to really boost internal motivation? Well, here's a couple of things. Number one, I think I've said this 5 million times since I started these lives. One of the easiest ways that you can start to understand these psychological tricks, playing on words, trick or treats, right? Or nudges that you can do to get this internal motivation from your team members is know your team members, right? You got to know what makes them tick. As leaders, if you don't understand what the driving force and factor is for a person to come up and show up to work every day, that's already an action that you need to take, right? A lot of times it's really good to go like one-on-ones, engagement surveys, just really observing what really makes that person tick. And I think the struggle I think the struggle sometimes as leaders is some people, to really get them motivated internally, they are so used to relying on external motivating factors to actually get things done. And that's when it becomes hard. If you're not sure what this looks like, let me help you. Let me know if you've heard this. I work better under pressure, right? That's one of them. Because a lot of people, I would say I can fall into this trap sometimes too. When you have just a little bit of push on you, there's something about it that kind of starts that engine and gets it going. And one of the things that I've really had to learn, I would say, as I've grown up, and I like grown up, as I have grown in my career, as I have gotten wiser, I've learned to create these internal pressure points, not necessarily stressors or things that cause anxiety, but really, how do I build these internal factors that the house doesn't have to be on fire for me to produce my best work, my top tier work? Some of my best stuff, I'll tell you this, I used to believe that some of my best stuff came when I was under pressure. And I think I did do really good work under pressure. But what tended to happen was I still had more room to go where I could have made something that was really, really, really good, absolutely phenomenal. And because I needed that external prompting often, that it left room on the table. I left money on the table, if you will. So as leaders, you've got to know what makes them tick. Um, when I talked a lot, when I would talk with senior leaders, I would say, hey, um, not everybody's motivated by promotions and money, right? Not everybody's motivated by promotions or money. You've got to know and understand what makes that person tick. So some people really want to believe, like, I want to really be inspired by the work that I do. I want to make an impact. I'm not saying not everybody is wired that way. Some people be like, yo, I'm trying to launch this rap career, or I'm trying to build this side hustle. So my job is a means to an end to get me from point A to point B, right? They'll show up, they'll still do great work, but really what's making them tick is not necessarily the work itself. And that's okay. But it's good for you to know that as a leader where they're trying to go. Another really good example is there are still, especially I would say in the tech industry, a lot of industries that don't have a lot of diversity. You're still seeing first generation kids, first generation corporate, right? First generation people being able to really move up the chain in leadership. You're seeing all of these things happen. So, as a result of that, when you think about that, some people, what's making them tick is, yes, I'm motivated by money. But I said, one of the things I used to like to say is sometimes people aren't necessarily trying to move up the ladder for the ladder's sake. They're trying to actually change and they're trying to move their family tree, right? That's what people are literally trying to say, hey, my family tree was here. I'm trying to make it so the next generation and the next generation has more fertile soil. And that's what's motivating me. That's why I'm hungry. That's why I show up. And so the more that you know your team members and what makes them tick and what gets them out of bed every day, that is how you're going to be able to really get the motivation going intrinsically, right? Because you can do more of that. You can fuse that. Um, any questions, make sure, for those of y'all just who are just hopping on, hey, what's up? Super glad you joined me. If you have comments, don't be shy. You can drop something in the comment. If you have a question, please make sure that you drop the question in the comment section as well, so that I can be able to answer them. I'll be able to see them all. All right. So when we're thinking about, so we've talked about, hey, so what are some of these tricks? What are some of these nudges? One-on-one conversations. A good question I like to ask people, I'll be like, hey, what gets you out of bed every morning? What gets you excited? What do you like about your job? What do you not like about your job? Right? These are all things that can move you further down the line to understanding intrinsic intrinsic motivation or internal motivation for your team members, right? Um, so now that we've talked about what are some things that you can do, what are some additional strategies, right? So it says, can I share some actionable strategies to boost within their teams? So one of the ways that I like to boost that within my team, boost the motivation is I'll do a lot of team building. I find that motivation. How would I say this? I believe that intrinsic or internal motivation has the ability to multiply within a team setting, right? So when you're setting goals with your team, right? So goal setting, making sure you have that set, right? Offering opportunities for skill development, your team growing together. That is a motivating factor. Making sure you're creating a sense of purpose in work, those are important. What do I mean by that? Well, one, setting goals. You should be setting goals. You should be setting marks for your team. It could be that, hey, like, I'll give you a really good example. This is still external motivation, but I think some of it sometimes can still carry over because people take pride in their work. If you work in way back in the day, I worked in a Walmart distribution center. Y'all, I've lived many lives. So I worked in a Walmart distribution center, and I led a team. It was an overnight team. I didn't work there long, but that's another story. It's probably, well, I found out I was pregnant, and I didn't want to be in the industrial environment around all the things. But long story short, I overseen it. It was a night team, right? So we'd come in at 7, leave at 7. In the Walmart distribution team, and I led a team of temps, and those temps would come in, and either they would be unloading the trucks or they would be loading the items onto a pallet, wrapping the pallet, and putting them into the trucks. Um, but one of the things that they had in the Walmart distribution center that I was at the time was like, hey, this many days accident free, right? So that's a good example of an external motivator, and I think that it what it does for a lot of people who are either competitive, that's internal, right? Take a lot of pride in internal work. They kind of start to work together, and then they are now your team collectively is now inspiring each other and helping hold each other accountable to go reach this goal, right? Oh, 50 days, no accidents, 100 days, no accidents. My days in sales, a lot of what we had was intrinsic, external, extrinsic, right? Like, so you had spiffs, you had bonuses, you have commissions, you have those things that get you motivated. You're motivated by money, but then after a while, like sometimes it was competitiveness. Um, they talk about Pavlos, right? Like there, there was something that man, I don't know. Actually, now my brain's working. Sorry, y'all. I just had this random thought. But one of the things that I think about is we would when we would get this certain type of sale, you would ring the bell. And it was like a dopamine hit, right? So you get this little and then what would happen is, real talk. So you would ring the bell, you get the sale, and then all the leaders would come down and high five you, right? And that dopamine hit was another way that it started to be something that was external, but then it started to become an internal driver. So when you're thinking about your team, what are things that you can be regularly celebrating? What are some things where you can give those virtual high fives? I think it's a lot harder now because teams are spread. Like, but this is the future of work. If you use Microsoft Teams has like a little internal kind of kudos board. But what makes people tick? Sometimes people just saying, "Atta girl," that's what makes people tick, and you get more of that, right? So those are all really, really important things. And all right. So I lost, hold on one second here. I just want to make sure because LinkedIn is a little funny when it on the lives. And so I have to keep it pulled up just in case you all ask questions because I want to make sure I get all your questions answered. Okay. So um let's see what else do we have. Let's talk about this one because I do think this is a really good question around like just continuing the conversation around around like what can potentially backfire. So this is one of my favorites. Okay. So it says, what are some common mistakes that leaders can make when trying to boost motivation? Okay. So what are some common mistakes that leaders make when they are trying to boost motivation? So I would say so there's a couple of common mistakes. So I think we talked about it before, but leaders can become overly reliant on external rewards. And what eventually happens is it can start to undermine the internal motivation factor, right? So you've got to kind of find this balance between the two. And I think when you really think about only focusing on external, it's also not sustainable. I think what's funny is when I think about when we would celebrate this sale, like this certain type of sale, when we would do that, like it didn't cost them anything. It was a bell and high fives, right? That's sustainable, right? And it didn't happen. It was something that was it was hard to get, but at that point, that's kind of one of those things where, I do think that it really helped boost it and didn't work against you. So you have to be mindful as leaders that we're just not always relying on it. How do you get people to want to show up and get fired up about work? And one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is explaining the why. Get heavy on your why, right? I would question as a leader when you're trying to figure out how to motivate your team members, what's your why? This is what we do. Why do we do it? Well, we're a part of this larger group, and this is what this larger group does. Why is that important? Now that I understand why my team feeds into the larger team, maybe there's another layer. This team now fits into this team, and why is that important? And you can do that you should be able to do that all the way up to the top of the company and being able to understand the purpose of the organization and how and why we do things. And can you talk really about what you do day to day into the mission and the vision and the impact and the goals that the organization is trying to make? That's one of the ways that's a common mistake where leaders cannot actually connect the work that they do to the larger vision and purpose of the organization. And I think that is when you have leaders who are overly reliant on external rewards. I think that's something that we have to look at and that you have to check, right? Good stuff. Good stuff. So here's what I say. Now, I've talked a lot about externals and potential pitfalls of externals, but I will tell you, you cannot ignore external either, right? You can't be so focused on internal motivation that you do forget like the basics, which is like compensation, benefits. Those are things that can lead to people being dissatisfaction. Um, I will tell you and I don't even think this isn't even on here. This is just going to be a straight up freebie. As leaders, it is important for you to watch and understand the pulse of your organization. When you have typically, there's not a team. It's hard to build a team of just all high performers all the time, right? That can be a difficult a difficult thing to do, right? But what I will say though is, um, if you're not careful in like overseeing in managing, either managing, we'll say up, or managing out people who are not performing, or low performers, or non-performers, or however you want to put it, if you don't manage them up and out, you could potentially start to see a decrease in your performers, and they become less motivated. You know, I'm going to say something very probably slightly controversial, but you know, there's when we talk about fairness, I think sometimes, you know, you talk about what's fair, and then you also, I think it's important to also talk about what's equitable. Okay. I treat all of my team members fair and equitable, right? It doesn't make sense for me to try to hold a new hire or early career or a recent grad at the standard that I may hold one of my senior leaders, right? Senior people on my team. It's not fair, right? However, what can happen is maybe how you actually lead everybody at these different levels and different states can actually find yourself in an issue where you are, what's the word? Not necessarily, you can, people can lose motivation, and largely sometimes through trust, they can lack trust, and that could be an issue as well. Um, Okay, so Matt, um, great question. How have my motivators changed throughout my career and over time? Um, ooh, this is going to be good. Okay, so how have my motivators changed throughout my career and over time? And then Matt also says working in the early talent area, see firsthand when students value certain things, maybe more so than mid career or even more than previous generations. Very, very good. So I would say, how has my motivation changed throughout my career and over time? I think early in career, it was easier for me to be motivated by money. I'm just going to be honest. Early career, I was absolutely money driven. I still am very much a people first type of person. So I will say that I am also motivated by like being, I'm extremely competitive. So I'm motivated by being the best. I want to be the best. I want to be at the top. I think that's one thing that has never changed about me. Is I am highly motivated about being the best all the time. I am extremely competitive all the time. But early career, it was that money. Like, I ain't gonna lie, like, cause you have goal, like you have things you want to do. You want to go out, you want to eat. I know, like this generation, you know, I know Gen Zers, I say even younger millennials, y'all love a good brunch. And like brunch is, listen, brunch be expensive. Like, I get it, right? So I think early career, I was absolutely motivated by money, absolutely motivated by mobility and ability to move up so that I can make more money. No qualms about that. I'm just going to be completely transparent. I think as I got older, as I moved through my career, once again, money, I'm not gonna lie, money is definitely in there for me. Run me my coins. But I think it wasn't as important, like per se. Like I would say over time, motivating factors that changed for me in my career was who I worked for, the work that I did, what skill sets I started to gain in the process. Um, you know, sometimes for me, I may stay in a role because I want to gap. I want to, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to build like a bridge where I'm gapped skill wise. So I would maybe stay in that role. And sometimes, even when I wasn't the biggest fan of a role, I would stay in it because I knew that it was going to get me from kind of point A over to point B. So I really, that's at least what I think about in terms of that. Um, I would say post I think look, here's the deal. Actually, Matt, I'm gonna say this because I know Matt, so I'm gonna tell Matt like I can talk to Matt like I just talk to anybody else here. Here's what I'll say. I turned 40 this year, and I think a lot of things for me shifted. I didn't have like a quarter midlife crisis or anything like that, or almost midlife crisis. I think what you start to do is earlier in your career, at least for me, earlier in my career, I was money motivated. I was mobility motivated. I wanted to do the things. And then I got all the things. And some of them came even faster than I thought. And I liked it. It was fun. It was cool. But I realized I actually wanted more. And so what I thought it was that I wanted, I realized I didn't. And that's really what motivated me to really kind of make some shifts and changes in my career. I think there are some internal things. I am motivated by autonomy. Like, just let me do my job, right? So I'm very motivated by autonomy. I'm motivated by freedom. I'm motivated by results and impact. I'm really I'm definitely people oriented. So those are all things that for me, I think I went probably more internal, like selfishly, like wanting to move the needle forward to really now, if I look about like, like I'm 40, a lot of times people like view aging as bad, but like let's just say 65 is the retirement. Yo, I still got another 25 years in this game. Like let's just let that marinate for a minute, right? 25 years left in the workforce, right? If I don't hit the lottery and retire, right? Which I probably still wouldn't. But when you think about it from that, I think the shift for me came is I am now thinking about legacy, right? That's the shift for me. The shift was definitely motivated by money, like moving up, mobility, positioning myself, positioning my family to be in a better situation. For me, it was making good on the sacrifices that my family has made for me to have a better life than they had, right? My dad spent 23 years in the Marine Corps. 23 years in the Marine Corps. I absolutely had access and abilities, had access. I had, and I think abilities, I would even say abilities, because a lot of what he's taught me, a lot of what I know he's also taught me. Um, a lot of that came from his sacrifice of, yo, got, gonna take care of my family, gonna spend 23 years in the Marine Corps. And I it's a large part of who I am. And I think one of the things that motivates me is making good on that sacrifice. Sacrifice from my both of my parents, right? So I think about those things. I think there's still some things that still basically are humming underneath. But listen, I once again, full transparency. I still think I'd be lying if I didn't say money wasn't a motivator, but I think it's not in the way that it used to be, right? I think money was a motivator early in my career because I wanted to buy shoes and the things and the clothes and go places. I think now money becomes a motivator for me, and that's one of the things that has shifted for me in my career was because I understand that that money equals impact. Like money isn't a bad thing, right? Like the more money I make, the more I can help people. And so I think that to me is kind of a different shift. But I think that's a really good question, because it is like it's hard. It's hard to kind of, and I think over time, the one of the mistakes that I think I will say is if you find yourself not motivated, if you find yourself struggling in a role and it goes beyond maybe I'm just tired or, hey, I had a rough week, like, the difference between the two. But if you start to find yourself like struggling, like you're teetering into that burnout phase, not really kind of like, hey, this is my heart isn't in it. listen. Listen. Doesn't mean that you have to wake up the next day and put your 2-week notice in and quit your job. But I do think that when you start to lack internal motivation to lead your teams, when your team members are lacking internal motivation to do great work and show up, everything else becomes hard. It just does. And so you have to evaluate that. Um, and listen and take some time away to think and evaluate and understand what's going on. I think leaders, it's one of the hardest things I think about leadership, right? Because I'm as a leader, you're motivated to make sure that your people get the work done and you have a job to do in the performance. And so, how do you balance that? Because at the end of the day, like I'm going to pick on Matt because I know Matt is watching, but I can't make Matt do anything. Matt has to want to do it. And he can choose not to. At that point, I can choose to fire Matt, but right? But you've got to figure that out, and it's hard. A lot of times some people don't want to talk about generational things, and I know Matt talked about it earlier. For those of you all who are just joining, um, different groups of people are motivated by different things. I think we can't ignore generational differences. I think we're all more alike than we are different. But I do think how we view work and the way that we view work as a whole, when you look at the different generations, it is different, right? Like I think about previous generations, right? Like what the organization did was what the organization did. I came to work, I did what I needed to do, I do my job, I get my paycheck, I go, I take care of my family. Like it's all of those things, right? So you have one in the spectrum, but then now I think what we're seeing really with, I'd say millennials, a lot with Gen Zs is like, I'm motivated to do my work with a company that I feel like absolutely has to line up with my values and what it is that I want to do and the difference I make in the world. And so I think companies and leaders are trying to figure that out because it wasn't. If you have a company that's been around for the last 40, 50 years, like, and you've got all these generations in the workforce, I think it's a conversation you should be having, like really understanding what is motivating your team members, what is motivating, how do you take it to the next level. And I think I'll go back to culture. When we talk about how to really motivate, part of that is building a culture where people take pride in the work that they do, people take pride in the organizations that they work for. All of those, I think, really do start to play into this internal motivation. Like, I love my job. I love what we do. I love making a difference. I love impact. I get to do this every day. And that's how you know, right? What's up, Gene? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so, like, that's one of the key things, right? Like, when you get people to say, not I have to do this, but I get to do it, that's how you know you've broken the internal motivation. That's how you know you've broken it. That's how you know you've gotten what you need to do. I don't have to do this. I get to do it. And so as leaders, what does that look like? How can we figure it out? Like that's one of the biggest little it's hard because I'll tell you, like, even as a leader, one of the hardest things is how do you motivate when you're not motivated? That can be hard too. Right? Yo, like I gotta motivate my team and I'm not motivated, which is why it has to come. You can't just rely on external. You have to rely on more than just like the external stuff. Gene says, "Hey, my professor is doing a live and no one told me." Listen, I told y'all I've lived many lives. Gene was by far one of my favorite students. I actually taught a writing class, and I co-facilitated a math class, University of Phoenix out of Savannah. So I've lived many lives, y'all. Many lives. But listen. If you have questions around motivation, make sure that you drop them in. I've got about 15 more minutes left here. I always want to make good on that. I will tell you, I am super duper excited about one project that I want to share with you all, that I'm doing, and I'm going to copy it and paste it into the chat. So one of the things that I believe in is a good in order to be successful, everybody successful people have coaches. Successful people follow the breadcrumbs of those who were successful before them. I'm highly motivated by that alone. And so one of the things that I'm doing is I am in the process of taking a master class on how to build experience products, right? So an experience product is like you're coming in, you're doing like coaching, either coaching or learning or online courses. And then how do you build that product? How do you build that to be experiential? So I'm working on that right now, and I'm in a master class working on this with lots of other people. And so one of the things that they've asked us to do is I'm going to put it in the chat. Um, is I'm collecting data on. Let me drop that in there. So I'm collecting data on leaders and the common challenges. So this particular survey is about the three biggest challenges facing business leaders today, right? It is anonymous. You do have the ability to fill it out, but it's really to really help me understand like the direction in which people are going. There's some additional demographic information that is optional in some open fields, but it really does help me to understand like, hey, like how do I help um how do I help leaders? What are leaders actually struggling with? And so it's been very insightful already in terms of like what people are saying and how they're responding. Um, Already, I'll give you guys just a little sneak peek if you want. So I'll give a quick sneak peek, and then we'll go into. I got one more question, and we'll end today's live with some feedback on probably the question. I'll say is I'll give you guys some top three tips for leaders trying for leaders looking to foster a culture of intrinsic motivation. So that's how we'll end. So but for those of you all for the survey, so just a little sneak peek behind the curtain of the survey. So far, as it pertains to leaders, the top three things that most leaders say are a challenge are priority alignment, right? Setting goals, competing priorities, and senior leadership. Another, both of these are actually tied. At almost half the leaders have said that these two are very important. Communication, which is including within the team stakeholders or senior leadership. Number three, is goal setting and measuring progress. So those are kind of the top three things that leaders are saying that they're struggling with. I have right now one, two, three that are tied for fourth, which is change management, motivation and engagement, and or burnout, and then time management and or work life integration. So it's been very interesting watching this survey kind of get filled out, and people giving their feedback in terms of what they're struggling with. And so I would definitely say that I've learned quite a bit just about the landscape, and it's good to ask these questions because it's there's definitely no point in assuming, right? All right. So we've got 10 minutes left. Still talking about motivation hacks to keep you going, tricks or treats, right? So I wanted to end by really talking about what are the top three tips for leaders looking to foster a culture of intrinsic motivation or as we like to say, internal motivation. So what are the top 3 tips for leaders looking to foster a culture of intrinsic motivation? All right, get your pens and paper ready, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so what are my top 3 tips? Tip number 1 is foster autonomy. Okay. People don't like to be micromanaged. I hated being micromanaged. I think autonomy is really important, right? Because it's here's what I'll say, especially for leaders who struggle with delegation, probably very likely, highly probable. Did I mention it's probably probable? Uh that you struggle to foster autonomy within the organization. And the reason why, so when you think about internal motivation and why fostering autonomy is important, it's important that people don't always come to you for everything, right? So sometimes what happens is when you're fostering a sense of autonomy, there is a level of risk because people are going to make decisions based on what it is that they want to do and how they're going to do it and the way that they go about completing a task. And sometimes they're wrong and they'll have to learn, or they came up short and they'll learn. But there's something about when they have enough autonomy and they get it right, and then they start to get it right over and over and over again. There's not, it's like oxygen. It's oxygen for the team, it's oxygen for them to get it right. Believe it or not, for you, it becomes oxygen for you because you're going to be able to rely more on those team members to get those things done. So autonomy matters. I think it's one of the things we don't think about as really how to foster a culture of motivation, but people want to have a level of ownership in what they're doing. And it's hard as leaders to let go. I almost think about autonomy as like, if you think about your team members. So I had so my daughter, when she first learned to ride a bike, right? She doesn't ride a bike hardly anymore right now, but when you first learn to ride a bike, right? That's kind of how we are, right? So they're going in, you got the training wheels, right? And a lot of times the leader, you're the training wheels. And then what happens is it's like, okay, we're gonna take the training wheels off. And I remember when she started learning how to bike, like we went to the backyard, right? So she still was learning, but she had a fence. She had a fence, and she also had the grass because we were in the backyard. And so she would go in the backyard and she would practice riding the bike in the backyard because one, she's safe because she's fenced in, right? She's fenced in. And then she had somewhere soft to land. This will preach. Okay. Nonetheless, right? So as leaders, right? So then once she learned how to, she got comfortable enough riding her bike in the backyard where she had boundaries, but a soft place to land, we went out onto the sidewalk. And now we're on the sidewalk. And so now she's learning, she's maneuvering, learning how to turn. Now we're learning safety, where to go, where, look both ways. This is how you ride, right? Now, so confidence is boosting. This is motivating because every single step of the way, she's getting more and more motivated, right? To get it and do it, right? I'm there, I'm cheerleading, I'm boom, 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 high-fiving. And then eventually, she would ride her bike. She also had a scooter and a hoverboard, which I think she preferred, right? But whatever the mechanism or the vehicle, it started to become easier for her. And so then the boundaries opened up for her to have some autonomy. She would ride her bike or sometimes walk or take her scooter to a friend's house. That's how we have to view autonomy as leaders and why it's a motivating factor. Right. And so the more that you do that, the higher their confidence is, the more motivated that they become. And also, hopefully, the less that you will have on your plate as leaders and you can delegate more. So I hope that helped. That's tip number 1, right? Foster a culture of autonomy. That is a huge motivator. And I will say, though, here's what I'll tell you. As leaders, if you have people who are out of pocket, it's also important that you check the autonomy to keep the team culture intact. So I think that's really important. Okay, so that's tip number one, foster autonomy. Tip number two, align work with individual strengths and interests. This is also very important. So make sure that you're aligning the work with what that person's strengths and their interests are. Okay. Why is this important for motivation? When you're aligning their work with their strengths and with their interests, you will start to see an increase of where their potential is. You know, I was the type, and I know Matt asked a question. Matt asked a question. Matt asked a question around like, hey, like, what were these motivators that changed throughout my career and over time? I will say, when I think about my individual strengths and my interests, I typically, as I moved through my career, only started to accept roles that allowed me to work within my individual strengths and my interests. I didn't spend a ton of time in roles and organizations. I didn't spend a lot of time with roles and organizations. I think organizations because I was in a big company that didn't align with my interests or my strengths. So find out um, where people are like where their strengths are, where their interests are, and try to build on that. That can also help. And sometimes you can't always. Sometimes the job is the job, right? Look, I'll give you. I worked at McDonald's. I told y'all I lived many lives. I've worked at Pizza Hut, right? Yo, cooking fries, like didn't. It's not necessarily along my level of strengths. It's not necessarily along my level of strengths or interests. But you know what is? I love working under pressure. So I loved working like a Friday night. Like if I wasn't doing band stuff, like Friday nights during basketball season, I loved it because like I'd be in the kitchen, boom, 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 boom. That chaos, loved it. And so my leader, most of the time, I wasn't always in the front, or like a busload would come in. I would switch to a register because they were catering to my strengths and my interests. I loved like a little bit of chaos. And if you know me, that has not changed. So that's one of the things that you can do, right? So number one, foster autonomy. Number two, align your work with individual strengths and interests. So that is another key piece. Jean, I seen your question. Jean asked me, do I work with any businesses? Yes. Actually, I just had, it's kind of cool, meeting with my first clients in a pretty big gaming company. So I'm excited to do some work for them. But I will send you a personal message and we will absolutely and definitely talk about some of the work that I'm doing within businesses, within organizations. Okay. And then so like let's go to number three. So number one, foster autonomy. Number two, align work with individual strengths and interests. And we're gonna finally close it out with number three, the tip that you would have to I forgot my question. To foster a culture of internal motivation. And that is build a culture that values growth and learning. Okay. Build a culture that values growth and learning. I believe in having a growth mindset. Having a growth mindset in your organization or for your team is a necessary. One of the ways that I build a culture for growth and learning for my team was I called them No Meeting Fridays. And I encouraged my team to spend time working on their craft and being a practitioner. I said, hey, use Fridays. My expectation of you, this is what I told my team, and they will tell you. My expectation of you is on Fridays that you set aside at least an hour. At least an hour. I prefer, like, depending on their workload, some could maybe do an hour and a half, learning and being a practitioner, right? That means reading an article. That means figuring out like what it is that you a topic that actually interests you, whatever it is, like spend time doing that. And so I did that, and I think That was one of the things that was really a good internal focus for my team, and how I fostered growth and learning was always making sure that they had time within their week to learn. And it doesn't have to be these massive classes. Doesn't have to be half day sessions. Sometimes I'd say, hey, go check out this video. I saw this video. But it really, really is important to foster a growth mindset and learning within your organization. Matt said, thanks for the great advice today. Man, I appreciate it, Matt. It's always a joy when you join. So I enjoy, I'm glad that some of these things helped you. If one thing helped you, then it was worth the time for me. So I always appreciate it. So build a culture that values growth and learning. And that means for you too. It's so, so important that we value this as leaders, as we're growing and we're learning and we're figuring things out even for ourselves, that you really understand that to get people internally motivated, they've got to grow, right? They've got to grow. They've got to learn. As you give them autonomy and you work within their strengths and their interests, there's bound to be more questions. There's bound to be more opportunities to coach and give them feedback. And the more that you do that, the more that they grow, the more that they learn. And then that becomes boop, 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 right? That's how you're moving it up. That's how you're holding, that's how you're growing. That's how you grow your organization. That's how you get high performing teams, right? My team was a high performing team. I've coached sales teams. Part of that is growth and learning, because eventually, and I've got to go because I know it's 3:02. I try to be really good about ending on time because I know some people are watching and then until they head into their next meeting. But here's what I'll say. When you think about when people start to get excited about their job, they're motivated about their job, they will hunger, like they'll be hungry to grow and learn. When you get a team that is hungry, like your sales teams is like, yo, I'm reading the Little Red Book on sales. I'm reading Zig Ziglar, right? I saw this video about sales, right? If you have somebody who's marketing, hey, I was studying some stuff about Gary Vaynerchuk. I would love to try some things out. This is the key. When we talk about motivation and how to build high performing teams and a high performing culture, this is where it's at. It's in the growth mindset, it's in learning. And I was very serious about my No Meeting Friday because I wanted them to spend that time developing themselves. I wanted them to spend that time preparing for the next week. And then they're leaving almost on a high. You welcome. That was major key alert, right? I didn't want my team going into the week spinning, because when they come back on Monday, guess what they're still doing? They're spinning because it becomes hard to unplug. So I say, hey, Fiji, get into those interests. What about your job do you love? What do you love? Like, what gets you excited about the industry that you're working in? Go spend some time on Friday, maybe an hour in the morning doing that. Then wrap up your week. Make sure everything's nice and neat and tight so you can go enjoy your weekend. And on Thursday, on Monday, they will come back excited to do the work because you haven't ran your team into the ground. There it is. Okay, look, thank you all so much for joining me. Gene, look, I appreciate it. I am so glad that I'm helping you with your business as well. This is something I love. I'm passionate about leadership. I'm passionate about culture, but I'm also passionate about performance because I think that oftentimes that gets left on the side. So thank you all so much for joining me. I love and appreciate this time. I hope that you all have an amazing week, and I'll catch y'all on the flip side. So I'll see you later.